And that's why people like Dr. King are called prophets. They do God's work. They take this awesome power of love and apply it to do good in this world. They confront injustice with the moral principles lodged into the very structure of this universe. People like Dr. King just don't sit back on days of worship waiting for God to show up. They feel it insufficient to simply praise the power and love of God when the inequities in society, the inequities are so self-evident. When injustice occurs, we are accountable. When injustice occurs, we are accountable. If we accept God as infinite love and boundless power, why then we are accountable. What remains extremely important to remember is that it was the transcendent quality of King's truth that provided the basis for a call to justice. In other words, King just didn't wake up one day and say, gosh, wouldn't it be a good idea if black people and white people had the same rights and dignity? He ties the call to justice to a divine imperative, a moral law that is one with the universe. We are called upon to fulfill God's work, who, as we know, and as our founding fathers reminded us, created all people as equals. King's I Have a Dream speech helped us climb the ladder, rung by rung, to a transcendent truth. It was a call to justice where one day equality among all people would be manifest as self-evident. One day, all that will matter is the content of a person's character. King's dream spoke to the spirit that lies in the breast of all vulnerable communities. And by vulnerable communities, I mean those who are targeted as less than equal by the mainstream. I'm talking about the outcasts, those who have no equal say within the so-called democracy where they live. The democracy has imposed new laws on voter rights. The democracy has imposed new laws on marriage rights. The democracy has imposed new laws on reproductive rights. And this year, the Supreme Court will hear challenges to these laws that stifle our democracy. Perhaps equality is not all that self-evident if different shades of equality must be considered and ultimately be decided upon by a high court. Equality remains elusive still today, where congressional delegates wish to balance the budget on the backs of the poor, where choosing to love someone and marry that person must conform to the homophobic prejudices of the community, where women cannot make decisions governing their own bodies. I am simply at a loss in understanding how political and community leaders who place qualifiers on equality can deny the pain and suffering they cause. They fail to understand that inequality is really a euphemism for pain and suffering. What is it about equality they don't understand? Recognizing the humanity within all people. It's that simple. Womanist theologian Dolores Williams once wrote that Dr. King had the ability to love white people into repentance. I never thought of it that way. Love white people into repentance. But keeping in mind Dr. King's reading this morning about loving your enemies, that may be a very real possibility. Yeah, loved white people into repentance. Drawing from his own theological understanding of God, King not only spoke truth to power, he spoke truth to power with love. Concepts like love, recognizing the humanity of all, ring hollow unless we adopt a true liberation movement awareness. Now, we may all want equality, but we need to ask ourselves honestly, are we motivated perhaps by a sense of white guilt? Do we feel uncomfortable due to the uneven playing field called America? Or can we actually join in the struggle to fight for equality as liberation movements require? And thus, are we able really to side with the excluded and oppressed? Because when you think about it, we have it pretty easy. We live, work, and breathe in white institutions of power. So are we prepared to side with the excluded and oppressed? This is quite different from white liberals trying to make white organizations more attractive to racial minorities. White liberals pursuing diversity campaigns provide nothing tangible, no change. There has to be a transformation of consciousness where racial justice becomes the only priority. White people need to conclude that merely adopting a position on oppression and exploitation, adopting a position does not suffice. Setting the top priority to engage in changing society is the only means by which equality will ever become America's truth. The bottom line, I believe, is that the legitimacy of American society can only be measured by the degree of equality. Some want to extend equality, others want to limit its scope. So this represents the battleground today in which the Supreme Court will weigh in on its own understanding of what equality really means. Already their premise seems to reveal that America has changed significantly since civil rights laws were established, making these laws somehow superfluous today. And yet it is fair to say that people of color in America today, even with a black president to lead them, still perceive our nation as racially and culturally alien. Now, with the growth of minority populations, there will be an America in the next 20 years where numerically no majority race will exist. We will all be in the minority. But this new reality will still face extreme challenges in our culture, where domination of people extends way back in our ancestry, an ideology embedded in our DNA where Europeans always dominated non-European people. An underlying white supremacy remains regardless of the actual number of white and non-white citizens in our country. In our consciousness, we will continue to view others as the minority. So this mindset or consciousness that labels others as minority remains the barrier to fulfilling the dream of our founding fathers. Our nation is still preoccupied with finding exceptions to the rule of equality. The poor, black, brown, red, gay, women, they still wait for equality to become self-evident. Equality, as we know from various movements throughout the decades, equality is only derived by changing those laws that keep certain people away from inclusion. And some of the legal victories we have won in the past are now on the chopping block with the intention of returning our nation to the place it was before 1965 pertaining to racism, sexism, and homophobia. By this June, the umpires of our Supreme Court will be making some calls, but the strike zone has been made smaller by at least 5 of the Supreme Court justices who will decide the outcome of the game. I humbly suggest that they read the Declaration of Independence and ask themselves, is it a self-evident truth in America today that all people are created equal? And if it is not self-evident, then it is our duty to make it so, to finally bring justice to the American democracy. Let us hope.